Welcome to Rye View's special four-part series on substance abuse. Substance abuse has become a critical concern in a countless number of communities, and our wonderful city of Rye has not been immune to its harmful and tragic outcomes. Our expert guest on this episode is Dr. Skip Sviokla, who is the author of From Harvard to Hell and Back, A Doctor's Journey Through Addiction to Recovery. Dr. Skip lived life as a successful, driven, athletic and brilliant graduate of Harvard University and Harvard Medical School.
He reveled in wealth and status until addiction brought his life crashing down, losing everything. Today, Dr. Skip is medical director of Phoenix House, New England, and co-owner of Substance Abuse Clinic in Rhode Island. He now dedicates his life to addicts trying to achieve sobriety and speaks worldwide to audiences, including medical professionals seeking answers about addiction. We had the good fortune to sit down with Dr. Skip for Rye Views. So joining us now is Dr. Skip Sviokla, and well known to affectionately as Dr. Skip.
Correct.
And he wrote the book From Harvard to Hell and Back, and it is a doctor's journey through addiction to recovery. And we're lucky to have him here today with us to be in recovery so he can talk to us and tell us, all about the story. A very interesting read.
Thank you very much. I'm lucky to be here, and I enjoy talking about this illness, which unfortunately is now burgeoning all over the country, and I know it's had a local impact as well.
Tell us a little bit about your start in life. I mean, you grew up in Boston, or?
I grew up in Brockton, Mass, home of Rocky Marciano, and somebody nobody even remembers, a great heavyweight champion.
No,
I didn't know him. I grew up in a middle-class family, but I had a wonderful life. Looking back, it was a factory town that I grew up in. I loved school. And I didn't want for anything. We were middle class, but we seemed to be the richest middle class people in the little village that we lived in. And so I wanted for nothing, and I found that school was fascinating and interesting and very easy. And in retrospect, I think that as I was growing up in the family, as long as I did well in school, then it didn't really matter what else happened. And there was not a huge premium on honesty. And I'm not blaming anybody, but if you did well in school, it didn't matter if I did something wrong or broke a window or did something else. As long as I was an A student, it seemed to be right. Now, that's not fair to my parents. I'm sure if they were here, they'd have a different point of view on it. But I thought I could get away with most anything. And I wasn't a bad kid, but, as long as I did grades, and that sort of was easy for me.
And you were very successful throughout.
Was very successful.
Career and
yeah, I did. I fortunately, I loved learning. I went to a Jesuit high school in Boston, and then I played football, and I had some real, I was a big kid who was cocky, obnoxious, and used to get beaten up by a lot of smaller, older kids. And so I didn't know why I'd end up crying when some kid half my size would beat me up. It's because he was older and more mature. And I was just mouthing off about how smart I was. So I wasn't a really nice kid. So I decided I wanted to play football because I watched those guys on TV, the New York Giants then, back in Brockton, Massachusetts, because there were no Patriots. And I'd watch the Giants, and I'd say, if those guys are good, I want to be like that. So I had a passion to play football. I very quickly became pretty good at football in high school, and then being a captain of the football team, a co-captain, and getting all A's at a Jesuit school, suddenly all colleges wanted me. And then I got into Harvard College, and things weren't very difficult there either, and I did very well there, and I got mostly A's and throughout that. A little harder to make that football team, but I actually became a pretty good football player there, so things fell to me easily. So the kid from Brockton, 25 miles away, was doing well. Nothing seemed to be hard, and I was very fortunate. When I decided what I wanted to do, my own immaturity kind of came through, because I thought, well, I did see a doctor once who operated on my mother. He looked pretty impressive to me. I really liked the way he looked and what he did. He saved her life, I found out later. So I think I'll go to medical school because you'll make a lot of money and you'll be well respected. Well, I was wrong about that, but I really thought, I'll do that. And so I applied to Harvard Medical School, but football season my last year was coming up, and I didn't really have time to apply anywhere else And so I applied to Harvard Medical School, and again, pretty difficult medical school to get into. Lo and behold, I got in. So really, without a lot of effort.
And this is really where you hit on your
My first
failure. And up to this point, it had been just a bed of roses.
Success all the way. No question about it. I had an easy row and went to medical school, met my wife, who's still with me now, and we dated throughout that first year of medical school, but I thought I could get by with very little effort the way I really had so far in every aspect. And Harvard Medical School had just gotten to that year, a pass-fail policy. They weren't going to grade people, they were going to experiment it, which they since have done away with. And at the end of a year, I had taken a lot of tests, and there were no grades on there, and there was some handwriting. But I knew I wasn't doing very well in it, but I thought, I guess they're letting me, I'm doing okay. And so the day before I was to get married at the end of my first year of medical school, I got a call from the dean just as I was walking out of the door. He said, "Can you come over and talk to me, Skip?" And I said, "Well, this doesn't sound good." Went over there, walked in there, and he said, "Hi, we're going to take some responsibility for this because we should have contacted you a lot long ago. But what are you doing tomorrow?" Because he had plans to start testing me. I said, "Well, I was going to get married." And he said, "Ooh, okay. Well, you failed your first year in Harvard Medical School, and we want to figure out what to do about it." And that was the first time in my life I'd failed in anything, and it was a pretty big blow. And he said, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you go and have as good a wedding as you can, and we'll see you when you get back from your honeymoon." And so I think the seeds of my drug addiction and my alcoholism certainly popped up then, because he said, "Go ahead, come back, meet with us when you come back." And as I left, in all fairness, I should have called my wife-to-be and say, "Look, I know you think you married a superstar doctor from Harvard Medical School. You married a loser, or you're going to marry a loser and a bum." And I didn't. I decided to lie to her. So I didn't tell her, and I married her. And we went off to the honeymoon, and every hour of the next week or 10 days, I thought I'm going to tell her next. And I didn't until months after we got back, and I was ready to go into my second year of medical school.
Now let me stop you at this point in the story and ask, how was your addiction up until this point? Were there signs, were there things that you were doing when you were a little kid that you can look back on now, or that, through it, that led you to this?
As a little kid, no. When I was in Brockton and going to little parochial school, I really was a good kid. I might have been cocky and obnoxious, but I didn't do anything wrong. There were little seeds of change in me in college that was interesting. Football meant a lot to me. And so although I drank like every other college kid, come the spring, I would realize that in the summer I was going to have to stop and get ready for football, and could stop all the way through football season, except for a couple of drinks after a victory or something. But I never abused alcohol during the football season. Now, from December forward into the next summer, I would drink as heavily as any other college kid. But I do remember one day, my junior year in college, in the spring, I couldn't find any girls. There were no guys who wanted to go out and drinking. So I found myself in a little bar in Cambridge with a false ID. And to show you what a really big drinker I was, I had 12 whiskey sours. So I was clearly not drinking for the taste. I might have been drinking for the first taste. But I found myself wandering, staggering back in the middle of a beautiful evening in Cambridge, Mass., thinking, something wrong with this. I don't know, why am I out drinking a dozen whiskey sours? Why am I impaired? Why am I drunk? On my own.
Mm-hmm. But it didn't trigger you to
Didn't trigger me to say anything. Woke up the next morning and thought, well, that's just an aberration. I'm not worried about it. And so I didn't. I also refused to smoke any marijuana, which most of my friends who were not on the football team did, until the spring of my senior year, after football had stopped. And so I did try marijuana then. I wasn't crazy about it. It's a lot weaker than the marijuana now. I didn't like it. It triggered off a little bit of paranoia in me. Did try some other drugs that were around. Actually, methamphetamine was around in little tinfoil packages. I do remember trying some methamphetamine because I knew I didn't have to get ready for football in the fall and everything else. So, but I could put that down and never think about it again. So I abused occasional drugs, but it was mostly the fact that I realized I was doing it surreptitiously. I could have been caught. It could have ruined my career. But I dismissed that. I thought, I'm way too smart.
You're in control.
And was it mostly alcohol at that stage?
The alcohol was off and on. One of the signs that I know now, because I'm board certified addiction medicine, having lived through it and studied it, is that I never had a bad hangover. It didn't really matter how much I had when I woke up, and I did not have a bad hangover. That's a poor sign for people who drink a lot. If you don't get a bad hangover, you're more likely to become dependent upon alcohol. Studies show that. Yep. People who really get bad hangovers really do swear off on not drinking for a while. People like me wake up, well, okay, I'll be okay next time. It's not a big deal.
And you think that's just your makeup? That's how you genetically...
Part of it is, yes. I mean, clearly your genetic makeup is a part of the story, but even though they can identify genes and specific connectomes in the brain and everything else, currently the research in this field is amazing. I don't think we're much farther than when we used to call it nature versus nurture, because for every 2 alcoholic parents that you find, I can give you one child or one twin that will never have a drink and another one of the same family who will become a rip-roaring alcoholic. So something in the environment triggers us to either react to the horrible life you had with a couple of alcoholic parents in spite of your genes, and some people just go to it right away because it seems appropriate. So it's still a question of nature versus nurture, no matter how much they dress it up.
Now, this is a really important time here because you had a wife, a great support system. I understand you had a daughter pretty early on, and then you moved out to L.A.
California,
and you were really doing well.
Yes.
And things were more success.
More success. I did rebound from the failure. I repeated the first year, and then I found surgery, and and I love surgery, and so I really became very interested in that. And so it wasn't an effort for me to do well there. And I got the exact internship and residency I wanted in San Diego. And success came back, and I did have 3 children under 2 when we and I would work very hard as a surgical intern resident, but I loved doing what I was doing. I wanted to become the world's most famous gallbladder surgeon. It wasn't as sexy as cardiac surgery, wasn't good like neurosurgery, which was pretty crude back in those days, but I loved the right upper quadrant. If you've never cut somebody in the right upper quadrant and played around with their liver and their gallbladder, you just don't know what living is. I really loved it, and I was determined. Now they do it with tubes. It's not as much fun, but I really did love that. I mean, it was not work for me. I mean, I would stay at the hospital 50, 60, 70 hours and love it. I mean, I had to for a lot of it, but I just would stay. If there was another surgery, I'd be there. So I loved it. Then I had an accident on a Sunday afternoon. I picked up a bowl that my wife had washed. She was out walking my 3 kids with a babysitter, and I was not impaired. I had nothing to drink. I really was able to control myself during the surgery part. I picked up this bowl, and I was looking for water spots. I went to touch it with my other hand. It literally exploded. We know because we had it tested later. And this huge, heavy base came down and cut 5 tendons, an artery, and a vein. And I felt it hit, and I was looking at the ceiling, and I thought, what's all that red stuff up there? And it was blood coming out of my arm. So I drove around looking for my wife with a towel in my hand. I kind of feared that my surgery career was over because my hand wasn't working very well, and I was trying to drive the car. I drove by her once, saw her the second time, she knew to leave the kids there. She came walking over, looked inside. I was covered in blood. The car was in blood. I mean, I was really pumping blood out of my arm, my ulnar artery. Went to this hospital that I was training at in San Diego, had 9 hours of surgery and a good 9 months of rehab. And I never felt comfortable in the operating room again. And so at that time, I decided to leave surgery and go into emergency medicine. So that was a setback. But I was fortunate because I had another chance, a second chance at a second chance.
This is where Vicodin and your addiction to Vicodin comes in.
Well, actually, 25 years later is when it really hit me hard because I started a 25-year career in emergency medicine while my hand was healing over years from the surgery. And I did very well in emergency rooms, ran some emergency rooms, started emergency medicine practice covering a lot of rock and roll stars. 25 years I was successful, never was sued, had a wonderful time flying around the country, made a lot of money, had a lot of things for the kids. But my excesses started to get with me. I blew up to over 400 pounds, and I had a very early gastric bypass surgery at Scripps Clinic. That's when I got the first taste for Vicodin that I really enjoyed. So I was a good deal older. While I was healing from that, I had several complications. I had a legitimate need for Vicodin, but when the legitimate need for Vicodin left, I found myself wanting more. And so I then, over the next year or two, longed to have that Vicodin again, and then I started prescribing using friends who stuck with me incorrectly, nurses and other people I worked with to get illegal prescriptions. Maureen always tells me, don't tell them that part, I say, but it's out there in public record. So I did.
How was your relationship with Maureen up until this point and your family? And, were there signs at work?
No, you can. It took about the last 9 months I was really, Vicodin was my mistress. I paid attention only to getting more Vicodin. But even though it sounds awful, and I'm not saying I was not impaired, as long as you're taking only opiates, you're not mixing it with alcohol or benzodiazepines like Valium and other bad drugs, you can actually sound like you know what you're talking about and keep a concentration for a while. It's remarkable how well people can function on very high doses of opiates. Doesn't mean you're not impaired, doesn't mean you're not making mistakes, but it's not apparent like some other addictions are. So for the last 9 months, she knew that something was wrong. I'm not sure that she knew what was wrong. I went at pains to hide it until the Board of Medicine showed up at our door in La Jolla. And
the pharmacist who found you out and reported it?
They had found me out. Pharmacists had reported it months before. They'd been following me. And I drove home one day with the last couple of bottles of Vicodin in my pocket, saw the 3 people. I don't think they were really dressed in black, but metaphorically they looked at me like they were dressed in black. And Maureen saw me driving by in my fire engine red Cadillac convertible, and I just kept on going.
Did you know the jig was up?
I knew I knew the jig was up, and I went and found the best hotel in La Jolla and took the rest of the Vicodin and waited for the end to come, which came quickly.
But that didn't stop. That wasn't you.
No,
that looked like the bottom for you. But
it sure did.
That wasn't the bottom.
Right. Well, I absolutely right. They immediately pulled my license, and then the hospital that I worked at actually was willing to let me administrate in the area because they liked what I was doing in the hospital administration. Until the lawyer said, no, you can't do that, and the blocks were starting to fall. I had overspent. The IRS was after me for some back money. They were going to force sale of the house. We had a beautiful house. I'd really been living a crazy life. And what happened was that for about 9 weeks, I didn't have any alcohol. I felt miserable. I was going through withdrawal. And until I decided to start drinking alcohol again. And then the alcohol took me another 9 or 10 months to get as close to death with the alcohol as I could be before I recovered.
Couldn't get the opiates now.
Didn't want to get the opiates. I had been my own prescriber. I've been sending people out. I thought I had San Diego County counted. I had a map of San Diego County, what pharmacy they were going to. I never thought I'd get caught. I got caught. And so the last 150 Vicodin that I had on me, because I had to pay people money to go get them all over the place, cash, because I didn't want them using their insurance. I didn't want any of that. I thought I had it carefully laid out. And then I went through the mother of all withdrawals. And withdrawal from opiates is terrible. What you do is you first feel aches and pains start to come. It depends upon which opiate you're using, but within hours of not having what you need, aches and pains start. You get very moody. You start to perspire. You get restless legs. You can't sit still. Most people don't throw up. They get diarrhea within the first 12 to 18 hours, and you get this horrible depression that overcomes you. Early on, the physical part is bad, but the more times you find yourself going through these withdrawals, the more you realize that mentally you just can't do it again. You really rather die than having to go through it again. There's this ominous feeling, and there is some study now to show that opiates have some role in depression. I don't want to overstate it, but the people with low dopamine levels, there seems to be something really special about opiate addiction that makes it really horrible. All addiction's bad, and I'm not saying that it's it's not your fault if you're having the withdrawals, but the opiate addiction makes you feel like I just don't care if I get arrested and thrown in jail. I got to risk one more time writing another prescription because I cannot take this anymore. And even though my family and everything else is going to be cast aside, I just said, the hell with it, I'm going to try it one more time.
So you're not, you think you're in control?
That's correct.
You're not in any control whatsoever?
You're completely out of control. You are at mercy of the drug will win every time once you're dependent upon it.
And
after that time,
Yep.
was that the end? Did you get clean and sober then, or there was another roller coaster back into it?
That's when the last time that I did that, I knew no one in the barrio in San Diego. I knew nowhere to get drugs, and so I decided, I think wisely, don't try to go out and find some illegal opiates. And I certainly was frightened to go into any pharmacy that I've been using. So then I was miserable going through the withdrawal, and then for weeks I felt terrible. Post-acute withdrawal from opiates, people are very, very tired. People don't realize this. People take opiates for energy, not to get sleepy, crazy dream. Mm-hmm. They're using it energy-wise. So I was very tired for a couple of weeks, had trouble getting up and walking around, not to mention the shame and everything else. About 8 or 9 weeks into it, I decided, alcohol's legal. I'll just have a little bit of alcohol. And that began the real decline for me the second time around. And 9 months later, I was living on a roof, essentially homeless. We'd lost our home. Maureen had gone to work, was renting an apartment. And on the roof of that apartment, I was hiding. I don't think she even knew I was there at the time, drinking myself to death. So.
And was this the moment in your book where you had that switch, that moment of clarity where this is it? I'm going to just chuck it all.
That's correct. I mean, I was homeless. I looked and smelled homeless. There's no question about it. I mean, I couldn't go anywhere to shower except swim in the ocean when it was warm enough. And so I had been sitting in the back of AA meetings. As long as I was quiet and listened, I always thought I was like these alcoholics and these addicts who are in these rooms. What's different about me from them? I don't know, but I certainly am a lot like them. And I was sitting there. I was getting near the end. I just kept going over to the edge of the roof, looking down, thinking if I kill myself, it'll be a lot easier than trying to climb back out of this hole. And then I realized it was only 2.5 stories down, and I really better be diving correctly, or else I was just going to be a lot worse off. So I didn't do that, but it was in my head all the time. I sat down, and I was looking at a bottle of pop-off vodka that was half full. I think it might still be on that roof. And I was thinking, why can't I stop? I got to figure out how to stop. I'm a smart guy. I should be able to figure this out. And then I was thinking, what is it about these people that I admire so much, who I'm so much like? And then I realized I'm not like those alcoholics. I'm one of them. And that moment made me realize, oh my God, then all I have to do is stop. Now that sounds silly, but suddenly I felt it in my belly that if they can stop, I can stop. And so at that moment, I was able to never have another drink. Left the bottle of vodka, climbed down the stairs, went into the apartment, and started.
And is that
from
because
scratch.
you always felt that you could control it?
Yes.
And at that moment,
right.
It was a surrender almost. It
was an absolute. It is exactly what AA talks about as surrender. I surrendered to the power of the booze. I thought it's got power over me. I don't care. I just have to stop. The only way it has power over me if I'm thinking about it or if I'm going to pick it up and drink a little bit. Every once in a while, I'd say to myself seriously, I thought, I'll just have a little drink to figure this out because it's too hard to think about as I'm getting close to being not drunk again. And so for me, and when I thought about it later, I realized that it might have been a spiritual moment. It might have just been an insight thing. And I really hate to talk about that because it doesn't really matter what makes you change your insight. But that's when I realized, as I thought about it, that it's very much like an Escher print, where when you're looking at white birds on a black background or vice versa, which do people see? And I would, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the switch that day for me internally was very much like looking at a print. Instead of seeing the white birds on the black background, I saw the black birds on a white background.
Perception.
And my perception changed.
Do you think that being exposed to these people, we're trying to take this now to a level of awareness. So in your eyes, you're saying dilated pupils in the beginning, they're very tiny with the...
When you're impaired on opiates, your pupils are pinned. They're very small.
And then when you're coming off, they get...
When you're in withdrawal, when you haven't had them for a few hours, your pupils dilate.
Okay, and then medically, you said constipated versus...
When you're having a lot of trouble with constipation when you have plenty of opiates, but when you're short of opiates, you're in withdrawal, you have the opposite, which is diarrhea.
So some of these signs we can see if we look...
Absolutely right.
And then getting you exposed to people that had like problems really made it something you could relate to.
Absolutely.
Getting the help before you even recognized it. You said you weren't clean and sober at this point. But you were in these meetings.
Right. I used to go in drunk, and I would sit there and listen because I knew there were people who made it out of this, and I didn't figure out why until I was on the roof. But I used to look and say, I'm just like these people. They're successful. how are they successful? But I didn't really think about how until that moment when I realized, oh, they're not drinking. That sounds so silly and so obvious, but I can tell you, in the last 10 years that I've been treating people, they'll all say it isn't. It's not
when
that
you
simple.
get that fact.
Yeah. When you get it, you got it. And it doesn't mean you won't drink again. I mean, I've been 16, almost 15 and a half years now, without a drop of alcohol or drug. Don't want it. I realize I probably shouldn't. I probably could drink again. I don't think I will. In fact, the guy who helped me write the book said at the end, now, I want you to say that you're never going to drink again. And I said, I don't think I am, but I can't put that down. He said, that'll be good. It'll sell a lot of books. It'll get people mad at you. I said, that's not what I'm doing this for.
Right.
I don't think I'll ever drink again, but I do know I'm at risk for it.
What was the detox from, say, the alcohol abuse like versus the opiate abuse detox?
It's bad. Technically, statistically rather, more people die withdrawing from alcohol than withdrawing from all other drugs combined.
Really?
Yes. Withdrawing. When you withdraw from the alcohol, from the opiates, you feel terrible. Physically, you feel bad. And you do get some physical strain, but, other than the diarrhea and the really terrible feeling you have of foreboding and the perspiring, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up a little bit. But unless you get bad cardiac disease, you're not going to die from an opiate withdrawal. People wish they could die from an opiate withdrawal, but they don't. Withdrawing from alcohol and the tranquilizers like Valium and that ilk, Xanax, your brain on that medication is kept quiet by those drugs, and when you stop those acutely, your brain starts to really speed up, and it's that point where you can have a seizure. So clearly, withdrawing from benzodiazepines or alcohol, Valium, Xanax, or alcohol, kill a lot more people because of a seizure, or because, you'll aspirate while you're...
For that reason, do you think, you did this under medical care.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You were a doctor, so I'm sure that was a helpful part. But for the majority of people, would you say...
When you're drinking a lot every day, you need to consult somebody who knows what he's talking about, because not everybody can just stop drinking every day without going inpatient, at least for the first 3, 4, 5 days, to make sure that they're protected against seizing. Anybody who's had a withdrawal seizure who hasn't died at an early age really must go inpatient to go from a lot of alcohol every day to no alcohol. A lot of people who have never had a seizure and who aren't drinking that much don't need to go into a detox as long as you watch them in the first 3 or 4 days as they're coming off alcohol. But you really need to talk to somebody who knows what the risk is of dying from alcohol. Because although it's not a very high number, it's higher than all the other drugs together. Overdose, different story.
The addiction numbers that you were saying, 85% of people are not
dependent upon alcohol. That's correct.
And 94% of people are not dependent on an opiate. So we have a very small part we're addressing, but it's getting bigger, as you now know with your new job.
Right. I've been in addiction medicine. I got board certified in that field. I've been doing it now for the last 10 years. And, again, a third chance at life. And now
Tell them what that third chance. You had no license, down on your luck.
Down on my luck.
Again.
Completely out of money. No money. I mean no money. And I had to climb back to get my license. California was making my life tough. Every time I'd get to a point that they had set, they changed their mind. I think a lot of people said they were just trying to make an example of me because I had a couple of Harvard degrees. I didn't know about that. All I knew was every time I do what they wanted to, even when an administrative judge said, let him get his license back, monitor him all you want, they kept changing their mind. And I went through some pretty embarrassing and at that point I thought I deserve whatever I get. I'm not complaining about that. But it became apparent year after year that we weren't going to go anywhere. And Maureen, my wife, finally said, listen, let's go back to the East Coast where we're from. I did. I was already sober for 6-7 years when I got back, and then when I got to Rhode Island, they made me sign a 5-year contract in order to get my license back. I studied to get my boards and do all the other things to make sure that I was competent again. And and now I'm making a living helping other people get off drugs.
So what would your advice be to a 10th, 11th, 12th grader that just wants to have some fun and wants to have a drink or wants to have a painkiller? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I'd say don't do it. The reason I'd say don't do it, and sometimes I try to shock kids when I talk to them, I'll tell them about what happened to me. I'll say it doesn't matter when you get caught by this, the drug will more than likely... You can't tell them that if you do it once, they're going to actually become dependent, because some people won't even like it. But I just looked them in the eye, like I've done to all my grandchildren that are old enough, and said, look, you don't want to, and then I'll take out my teeth, or I'll show them a scar from surgery or had the operation, and all these different things. I think you need to scare people into one use may damn you for a long, long time, and you don't want to die. I don't know a better way of doing it than look them in the eye and say, talk to me before you make any of those mistakes.
Right.
If there were a magic way, I'd
What was the one thing you were saying? You speak to all your clients who come in, all your patients who come in, and they're talking to you and they're saying, what is the one common denominator of what they start on or experiment with that you
marijuana.
see?
The nonsense is being put out by the people who are pro-marijuana that marijuana is not a gateway drug is complete nonsense. I've not only done an anecdotal survey in my own practice, which has included hundreds of people addicted to lots of things over 10 years, but the numbers show that people do not, very rarely do they go straight to any other drug. Alcohol, which is legal, of course, except for underage, they'll use a lot. Cigarettes they'll use, but marijuana is the first illegal drug, although it's becoming less and less illegal around the country, that they use. It also puts them in contact with the people who are selling it. But the major thing is, at a young age, and it's a little hard to explain this to a 10 or 11-year-old, but it does change your brain. Not only does it really legitimately lower your IQ, continued use, the chance of you going to becoming dependent upon marijuana increases with the number of days in a week you smoke. So that this 8% number that a lot of people are trying to use and saying only 8% of people get addicted to marijuana and 15% of people get addicted to alcohol, that's fallacious. As the stronger marijuana comes, the more you use, the risk-reward center and everything else, the more you use, the more likely you become addicted. But you're going to be in contact with people who are then going to sell you other drugs. And everybody who gets a taste of an opiate, not everybody, but the vast majority of people, once they do opiates, whether it's starting out with pills or going straight to heroin because heroin is becoming available to kids, they drop the marijuana and go to the heroin because no one wants to ruin the opiate high with marijuana, except for the people who just like marijuana and never change. So the brain will be changed. There's no question about this. The risk-reward center in the brain will be, your risk-taking behavior will increase every time you smoke marijuana or eat marijuana and you don't have any bad consequence. Then your brain will just say there's no risk to taking this, and then you'll start to take it, and then you will, not quite as quickly as opiates, but you'll become dependent upon it. If you don't have it, you'll withdraw from it. The withdrawal is a little milder. There's a lot of lack of sleep when people withdraw from continuous use of marijuana. But there's no question that young brains are harmed tremendously by the use of marijuana. Under the age of 25, the part of the brain that's responsible for rewarding or making you care about risk doesn't mature until you're 25 years old. So there's no hope that the age of majority is going to be moved up to 25. Mm-hmm. So what you want to say is, look, why don't you just wait till you're an adult to make some other decisions? But in the meantime, it's a gateway drug. I don't care who says. And ask anybody who's in this field. Marijuana is very, very dangerous and will get you onto other things.
And that myth that it's not addictive, that you can just do alcohol and marijuana and not, is just a myth.
For children, it's absolutely a myth because we don't know what's happening as their brains are changing. Some 45-year-old person that wants to smoke a joint for the first time in his life when he's 45, is he going to become addicted to it? Probably not. I mean, the numbers, although they're getting higher than the 8% they claim, it's like alcohol a little bit higher.
Because he's developed.
He's developed. He's old enough and can make a decision, and a lot of other things have happened in his life to realize it. But for young people, absolutely ridiculous to say that one is you can put it down at any time. You might be able to, but you might not, and you might be harming yourself for the future.
The other biggest problem that we're seeing is, besides the marijuana not having an impact, the legalization in these states, is when actually you get off and you get into a recovery status, what happens is people go back there. The tolerance, talk about that you were talking
very
about
dangerous,
before.
Especially for opiates. What happens is people will go into rehab. They might even get on a pink cloud for a couple of weeks, and they're not using anything, and they haven't and they're clean, and they enjoy being clean. They
use something to bring them off it, or
normally in the country right now, the major drug to get people off it short term is methadone. So depending upon how much heroin or oxycodone or Vicodin, whatever you're doing, if you go into a rehab center or a detox center, you'll get 30 milligrams of methadone, 20, 10, 5. That will help bring you down a little bit. It's not very helpful. It lessens the withdrawal, but in the end, you have to stop at some point, and after 5, you get a couple of really days of being miserable. So you go through the physical withdrawal for 5 to 7 or 8 days while you're in treatment. And then if you're going to subscribe to, I'm just going to go to meetings and I'm going to not use, and you learn about the biology of the disease, and you leave within the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, and whatever reason you decide you're going to relapse or you're exposed to it, and you make your obsession is such that you just make a reflex reaction, take some. What you decide to do is remember what you used before. But the tolerance that you developed over months and years gets much less very quickly. And so you can easily take a lethal overdose even 3 weeks after your dose was 5 times as high, now your dose, and that's where a lot of people die. So they go out thinking, I got to take a lot because if I'm going to go back on this, I don't want to go back on this and not feel good. I've already jumped into this. But their tolerance has dropped quickly. What takes you months drops in weeks. And so it's a very, very dangerous situation for people out of rehab. All these people coming out of rehab in the entertainment industry have people specifically with them to keep reminding them. This is one good thing that's done. I wish they were more direct about it. Prince is a fine example of people not saying to him, hey, cut it out. I mean, he landed his plane to get some Narcan and he died because, well, it's obvious what his autopsy showed. People need to at least say, hey, if you're going to... It's a catch-22. Your tolerance is down. You are at major risk for death within a couple of weeks of using even less than what you used before you get into treatment. Beforehand. The tolerance is really the issue. Creates the addict and also causes him to die when he gets out of rehab if he's not successful.
So at the end of your book, just going back to your book, which I found very hopeful, was that you say the and back part of your journey was actually the best part of the journey, which is where you are now, I guess, for the last 16 years.
Right. My 4 children saw me in the worst shape they could possibly see me. I was disgusting, both from the opiates and then from the alcohol. They saw me lose control of my bowels. I was a total wreck. Once I got clean and sober, once I started to get better, I've since had 8 grandchildren. And not one of them has seen me impaired, smelled me impaired, and actually seek me out for advice. So I think
that's a wow. That's a really big wow.
Yeah. Well, I think overall,
that's the best part.
Yeah, that your story is actually a hopeful story, and we appreciate you coming and talking to us and telling us the nitty-gritty, the in and out of it all. Because it can't be easy, but I think hopefully it'll be somebody out there it's going to ring true to somebody.
I did write the book saying that anybody can become an addict. If I can become an addict, now anybody can get into recovery and really enjoy that recovery. It's not painful to be in recovery. I've never been so happy in my life.
Oh, that's great.
Well, thank you very much for coming to us.
Thanks for helping people, and thanks for being here to help hopefully millions who will watch you and hear your story.
Thank you both for asking me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.